In the previous chapter, we discussed about for statement which can be used for loop-based programming. We do have an enhanced version of the for loop statement, and in this chapter we will cover this, which is known as for each statement. So this is also an interesting statement, and most commonly used for loop statement in Java is for each. So let's explore that in this particular chapter. For each statement is basically an enhanced version of for loop statement, as simple as that. So where the mechanism of having an iteration variable and having that counter, incrementing that counter, all those things might not be really required for every place. Whenever you just looking at some array and you want to just get all the elements of the array, having, if let us assume you have 100 such statements or 100 such arrays have to be looped, so that iteration variables like I, j, k, all these things are kind of redundant logic that is basically written by a developer. So to address this problem, they brought in this for each statement, which is essentially an enhanced for loop, and it was introduced in JDK 5. And now, by and large, this is the most commonly used loop statement. So for each statement is one of the most commonly preferred statement, because you don't have those iteration variables hanging around, and it's less clutter and makes the code much cleaner. So that's the basic concept, where it loops through the collection of objects such as array in the same sequential order from start to finish. So whenever you have a requirement to just iterate one after the other in the same sequence, this would be helpful. For statement can still be used in case you want to decrement or you want to basically jump the order, etc. In those cases, yes, for the traditional for loop can also be useful in certain niche cases, but most of the cases this would be preferred. So in this case, what happens is we have to create a type which is basically a variable representing the type which is there inside the collection. Say for example, you have an array of float means float is the type, okay. Array of integer is int is the type. String array means string is the type. That's a very simple example. And I have to create a variable which actually represents the element of the array and provide that in the structure required, and then have the body of the loop. So that's a very simple mechanism of how the for each statement actually work. And coming to the type, so a type basically is nothing but the type of the collection element which is there inside the array. What type of an element is there, what data type is there, has to be specified, and it should be compatible with that particular element. For example, if we have an array of different custom types, an array of employees, for example, so it should also have the employee type or any other parent class where you can easily identify them. So that's the basic concept. And then you have to define the iteration variable, which will be a read-only iteration variable, which means you will not be able to modify that as part of this for each loop. In a normal for loop, you also have an option to modify the elements of the array. Here you will not be allowed. Then it also references to the elements from the collection. So you are already given that, so you don't have to do that additional logic. For example, if you look at our program that we have written in temperature analysis, so we extracted the element from the array and referred this as temperature readings of I, right? So we were referring to this. Instead, there is a variable already given as part of the for each statement. So that's a basic concept. And after each iteration, the next element will be stored automatically in this variable. So we don't have to really worry much about it, and you can reduce the line of code where you are basically grabbing the element from the array and assigning it to a variable. So that is handled automatically for you in the for each loop. So how does this work? How can you implement this? It's very simple. Let us change this program itself, our temperature analysis program, what we have already written in the previous exercise. Let us now replace this traditional for loop with the enhanced for loop. Okay, so with the for each statement. So all we have to do is I will just write this next to it, so that I don't want to just remove it. Instead, you will understand the difference. So we could say for, and the type is float, because we are having float array. Now I want to basically represent this as a variable. So we could say some temperature which I am getting. So a temperature which is inside the temp readings array, and inside the loop I will get the value. So what do I need to do with the value is what I need that logic for. So I could basically implement the same logic. So let me just bring the same thing here. All right. Okay. And then what I do is I say sum plus is equal to, here temperature readings of I will not come into picture because there is no variable called I at all defined. So it will be temperature. So that's a simple example. Next, for identifying the max temperature, you are comparing the temperature, which is nothing but the current value of the iteration coming into picture. So in the current iteration, what is there? So first iteration for, it will give me the first value. The second iteration, it will give the second value. Third iteration, third value, so on and so forth. Okay. And then this is the max temperature. So max temperature is nothing but the temperature. So if you do this, it basically replaces this for loop. So now we can remove this loop. Okay. Or let us have them as well. So just to help you understand that both are same, so we could basically do this. And first let us take this out here, and then repeat this in this particular place again. So let us say average temperature 1, and I will delete it later. Okay, I'll make it as average temperature 1. So with the for loop, and this is what I am basically having. So with this, there is any, yeah, it is also giving the hint. So anyway, now let us go ahead and run this program. So you see there is no difference in the output. So output recorded is so and so. So what is the maximum temperature and what is the average temperature? So you got this. So with this, we could basically say, I don't need this for loop in this kind of a computation. So all I can do is I can use a for each loop. So I just bring this for with the type, the variable. This is called as a float iteration type and iteration variable type and iteration variable, and the collection. So it's a very simple mechanism. So less logic to be written. So I don't need to do that I++ and a condition, etc. All those things are not really required. So that's a basic concept which is much more simple. So now let us run this program again. Okay, so now you see that it basically brings the same output what is expected. So this is about the for each statement that we have in Java. So in the next chapter, we will basically do some hands-on exercises for iteration statements. So where we will implement some new logic with these statements, with while, do while, for and for each statements. Stay tuned.